Alyssa sat quietly in the third row of the wedding hall, her dress a faded rose color, borrowed, pressed, and clinging to her every move like it knew it didn't belong. She crossed her legs carefully, trying not to wrinkle the hem. Beside her, her 8-year-old son, Jonah, swung his legs under the table in his small suit. It was a size too big, but he wore it proudly. He beamed at the chandeliers above. "Mom," he whispered, nudging her. "That looks like the spaceship in my comic." Alyssa smiled, adjusting his crooked tie. "Yeah, it kind of does." She wasn't supposed to be here. She knew that. But she came anyway. For him. And maybe, if she was honest, for herself too. Her younger sister, Bianca, floated across the room in a cloud of silk and tulle. Cameras followed her. Compliments bloomed in every corner like flowers after rain. "She's stunning," someone said behind Alyssa. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. She knew that voice. Knew how it always grew louder around Bianca. That was how it always had been. Bianca got the smiles. Alyssa got the comparisons. Bianca was the star. Alyssa learned to survive in the shade. But today, she had shown up anyway. Hair done in the mirror of her small apartment, makeup bought in samples, dress carefully zipped by shaking hands. Jonah thought they were here to celebrate. Alyssa hoped it would feel like a beginning. Instead, it already felt like the end. The reception glowed with golden lights, and every table was lined with white roses. Waiters moved like dancers. A string quartet played softly near the fountain. Alyssa looked around, trying to keep her hands from trembling. She hadn't seen her mother, Denise, yet. That was a blessing. Denise always knew how to turn a smile into a weapon. Bianca passed by their table, her dress shimmering. "You made it," she said, surprised. "And Jonah, wow, he's grown." Alyssa nodded. "He's excited to be here." Bianca didn't reply. She was already turning to someone else, someone who mattered more. Alyssa watched Bianca return to the head table, where laughter poured like champagne. She turned her attention back to Jonah, who was carefully folding his napkin into shapes. "Do you think Aunt Bianca will dance like in the movies?" he asked, eyes shining. "Probably." Alyssa smiled, brushing a crumb off his lapel. She always liked to be the center of attention. He nodded, satisfied. The wedding was magical in his eyes. Lights, music, shiny shoes. To him, this was a fairy tale. Alyssa didn't want to break the illusion. She leaned over and whispered, "Let's just enjoy the food, okay?" He grinned and nodded. She didn't tell him her name had been misspelled on the place card or that their table was next to the restrooms. They ate their salad slowly. Jonah dropped a bit of dressing on his tie, and Alyssa dabbed it gently with a napkin. "Sorry," he muttered. "It's okay, buddy," she said. "We'll clean it up." She glanced around the room and caught a few guests, whispering and chuckling. Her chest tightened. She knew those glances. She had worn them for years like a second skin. At the far end of the room, Denise raised a glass in Bianca's direction. Alyssa's stomach flipped. Her mother hadn't looked at her once. Not even when she walked in. But that was normal. That was expected. Denise had always made it clear that Alyssa was the family's cracked mirror, someone you looked away from. The speeches began after dessert. First was the best man, cracking jokes about college days and Bianca's obsessive love for wedding planning. Laughter followed. Then Bianca stood. She looked radiant. Her voice was calm, confident. "Thank you all for being here," she began, smiling wide. "It means the world to have every one of you share in this joy." Alyssa sipped her water. Jonah sat up straight, listening. "I especially want to thank my big sister, Alyssa," Bianca continued. Alyssa blinked in surprise. She looked at Jonah, who beamed. "That's you, Mama," he whispered excitedly. Bianca raised her flute and smiled. Alyssa has always been such an inspiration. A single mom. Strong, resilient, she paused, her voice lilting, and clearly unwanted by anyone else. The room erupted in laughter. Alyssa froze. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table. Jonah's smile faltered. He looked around, confused. "Why are they laughing?" he whispered. Alyssa couldn't speak. She stared at her sister, who kept smiling like she had just delivered the punchline of the year. Bianca sipped her champagne, perfectly composed. More laughter followed, from their cousins, from Bianca's bridesmaids. Then came Denise's voice. Loud, proud. She may be a used product, but she still cleans up well. Another wave of laughter, this time sharper. It sliced through Alyssa like glass. Jonah's eyes widened. "Mama," he whispered again. "What does she mean?" Alyssa's breath caught. She looked around. No one met her eyes. Not her uncle who used to sneak her candies. Not her grandfather, who once called her his brave girl. The people who had once bounced Jonah on their knees now laughed at his mother like she was entertainment. Her heart ached, not for herself, but for the boy beside her. She wanted to leave, to grab Jonah's hand and disappear. Her legs trembled under the table. Her napkin was clenched so tightly it nearly tore. She stood slowly, pushing back her chair. The music had stopped. Conversations died down. Alyssa didn't know where to look. Jonah held her hand tightly. "Let's go, Mama," he whispered. But then another chair scraped loudly. At the head table, Callum, the groom, Bianca's picture-perfect fiancé, stood up. He didn't look amused. He didn't look at Bianca. He looked straight at Alyssa. And he didn't blink. The entire room went still. Callum took the microphone from Bianca's hand. He didn't ask. He didn't smile. "I can't pretend I'm okay with what just happened," he said. The room froze. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned. "I won't stand here and let cruelty be passed off as humor." Murmurs spread. Guests looked at each other. Bianca's jaw dropped. "You mocked your sister for being a single mom," he said. "You humiliated her in front of her son." He turned slightly. "And none of you stopped it." Alyssa couldn't move. Jonah held her tighter. It wasn't a rescue. It was a reckoning. Bianca's lips parted, but no sound came. Callum didn't wait for her to find words. He looked around the room. Alyssa didn't ask for a spotlight. She sat quietly in the back with her son. She smiled. She clapped. She showed up. That's strength. That's grace. And you all turned that into a joke. Whispers spread like wildfire. Some guests looked down. Some exchanged uncomfortable glances. Denise scowled, folding her arms. Callum continued. "If being part of this family means laughing at someone's pain, then maybe I need to think hard about the kind of man I want to be." Gasps filled the room. A glass clinked loudly somewhere in the back. Callum wasn't finished. "You can have your perfect pictures, your golden daughter, your polished smiles. But I won't be part of a family that applauds cruelty. I won't marry into it." With that, he set the microphone down and walked past Bianca without a glance. His footsteps echoed as he crossed the room and disappeared through the exit. Silence followed, thick and heavy. Bianca stood frozen, her mouth still slightly open, her perfect day unraveling like thread from a torn dress. Denise stood abruptly, her chair scraping. "What a childish display," she muttered. "Ungrateful boy, just like your sister, always ruining things." But this time no one laughed. Her voice fell flat. People shifted in their seats, unsure. Alyssa didn't respond. She didn't have to. Something had shifted. She turned to Jonah, brushed the hair off his forehead, and whispered, "We're going home now, sweetheart." He nodded, and together they stood. Heads turned as they moved toward the exit, the air parting around them like a curtain. No one tried to stop them. A few guests looked like they wanted to speak, but their mouths stayed closed. Denise sat back down, her face red with frustration. Bianca stayed standing at the head table, frozen in place, hands clutching her glass like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Just as Alyssa reached the doorway, a voice called gently, "Alyssa." She turned. It was her grandfather, Harold. He looked older than she remembered, his eyes red-rimmed, his shoulders hunched. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have said something years ago." Alyssa held his gaze for a long moment. Her throat tightened, but she nodded. "Thank you," she said quietly. She didn't blame him for his silence. She knew what it cost to speak in a family like theirs. She wasn't angry, but she wasn't going to carry that silence anymore, either. Outside, the night air was crisp and still. Jonah looked up at her. "Is the wedding over?" he asked. Alyssa looked down, smiling faintly. "Yeah, baby," she said. "I think it ended exactly how it needed to." They drove home in silence. Jonah rested his head against the window, humming to himself. Alyssa stared ahead, her hand steady on the wheel. Her phone buzzed once, twice. She ignored it. That night, after Jonah had been tucked into bed, Alyssa sat on the edge of the couch, still in her dress. Her phone buzzed again. A text from her friend. "You have to see this." Attached was a link. Someone had recorded Callum's speech. It was already spreading online. She clicked it. There it was, his voice, calm and clear, slicing through the noise like truth always does. The comments rolled in by the hundreds. "This man is a hero. She deserved better. I'm crying watching this. To every single mom out there, this is for you." Alyssa didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just sat very still. It felt like something inside her, something tightly wound, had finally let go. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. The video was everywhere by morning. Strangers were messaging her. Some shared their own stories. Others just wanted to say they saw her, that she mattered. For once, she didn't feel invisible. Bianca tried to spin the story. She told people Callum overreacted, that it was just a joke. "People are too sensitive these days," she said in a comment on someone's post. But no one was buying it. The truth had landed, and it was loud. And the internet, for once, had chosen kindness. The wedding never happened. There were no wedding photos. No honeymoon. Bianca erased all the posts. Callum never said another word publicly, but Alyssa didn't need him to. He had already said enough. A few days later, a bouquet arrived at Alyssa's door. Wildflowers tied in twine. No note. Just a small card that read, "To the Lioness." She knew who it was from. She placed it on the windowsill, next to Jonah's latest painting. When Denise called, it wasn't to apologize. "You should have laughed along," she snapped. "You embarrassed this family." Alyssa waited until she finished. Then, in a calm voice, she said, "I'm not your scapegoat anymore." And hung up. No drama. No yelling. Just peace. Life didn't transform overnight. Alyssa still worked both jobs, mornings at the cafe, evenings at the hotel. She still packed Jonah's lunch with sticky notes that said, "You're amazing," and made pancakes on Saturdays. But something had changed. She stood straighter, spoke clearer. She didn't sit in the back of rooms anymore. She knew what she was worth. Jonah noticed too. He asked more questions. He wanted to know why some people were cruel, why others were brave. He spoke of Callum like he was a superhero in a suit instead of a cape. Sometimes Jonah would stand in front of the mirror and pretend to give a speech. "Not today," he'd say, pointing his toothbrush like a microphone. Alyssa would laugh, ruffling his hair. One night, as they brushed their teeth side by side, Jonah looked up. "Mom," he said, "are you still sad about what Aunt Bianca said?" Alyssa paused. She looked at his reflection in the mirror and shook her head gently. "Not anymore." "Why do you ask?" He shrugged. "Because I think you won, even though it wasn't a fight." That stayed with her. He was right. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't slammed any doors. She hadn't made a scene. She stood up, took her child's hand, and walked away. And someone else, someone unexpected, had decided that silence wasn't good enough anymore. Callum didn't just defend her. He reminded everyone in that room what love actually looked like. Not the kind in designer dresses, not the kind with flower walls and perfect lighting, but the kind that sees someone hurting and says, "No, not today." Bianca didn't apologize. She didn't reach out. Alyssa didn't expect her to. Some people never change. Some never look inward. And that was fine, because Alyssa had stopped needing apologies from people who only saw her as a mistake. She had stopped waiting to be invited to the table. She had built her own. Small, sturdy, filled with light and quiet laughter. A place where Jonah never had to wonder if kindness was enough. 6 months passed. The video kept circling. New people found it every day. Some reached out. Some cried. Some said it gave them courage to walk out of rooms that made them feel small. Alyssa never replied. She just read the messages and held them close. One evening, Jonah came home with a drawing. It was a picture of her, standing tall, hand in his, cape on her shoulders. The words at the bottom said, "My mom is the bravest person I know." She framed it and hung it in their hallway, right above the hooks where their jackets hung. Guests always asked about it. "Did he really draw that?" they'd say. "He really did," Alyssa would smile. He meant every word. And he had, because he'd seen her in the moment she could have broken and didn't. He'd watched her hold her head high and choose dignity over shame. One Sunday morning, while flipping pancakes, Jonah asked, "Do you think Callum's okay?" Alyssa looked up. "I think he's just fine." She didn't know where he was. She didn't need to. He had done what needed to be done. And that had changed everything. Not just for her, but for Jonah too. For every little boy who learned strength from softness. For every woman who once believed she had to stay silent to be polite. Because sometimes you don't get a perfect ending. No fireworks. No applause. Sometimes all you get is the quiet strength of walking away. And sometimes that's more than enough. Alyssa had lived a life full of almosts, of fading into the background. But not anymore. Now she stood in the light, not waiting to be chosen, not hoping for permission, just standing for herself, for her son, for every moment she'd been told she was less. And if you're reading this, if you've ever been laughed at, silenced, or pushed aside, know this: your voice matters. Your dignity matters. You don't have to yell to be heard. You don't need their approval to be worthy. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away with your head high and never look back. That's what Alyssa did. That's what made her a lioness. The seasons began to shift. Winter crept in with quiet evenings and hot cocoa. Alyssa wrapped Jonah in his favorite blanket, the one with little rockets, and tucked him in after homework and stories. One night, as snowflakes tapped against their window, Jonah asked, "Will Aunt Bianca ever say sorry?" Alyssa paused, brushing his cheek gently. "Maybe," she said softly, "but we don't need her to." Jonah looked thoughtful. "I guess we already have everything we need, right?" She kissed his forehead. "We do, love. We really do." Because forgiveness didn't have to come with an apology. And family didn't always mean the people you were born to. It could be the ones who chose to see you, truly see you, and stayed. A few weeks later, a letter arrived. Thick envelope, cream paper. No return address. Alyssa hesitated before opening it. Inside was a handwritten note. No greeting. Just a line. "You were never invisible. I just wasn't brave enough to stand beside you. See." Alyssa read it twice, then folded it carefully and tucked it into the back of her journal. She never told Jonah about it. Some things didn't need to be explained. They just needed to be felt. In that moment, she knew. What happened that night wasn't just a collapse. It was a beginning. Not for reconciliation, but for release. For freedom. The following spring, Alyssa spoke at a local women's center. She stood in front of a small crowd, mostly young mothers, a few volunteers, and shared her story, not for pity, but for power. She spoke about shame, about silence, about choosing to stand even when your knees shake. At the end, someone asked, "How did you get through it?" Alyssa looked toward the back, where Jonas sat swinging his legs and doodling on a notepad. She smiled, because someone small was always watching. And I wanted him to learn what strength really looks like. And so she kept walking forward. No spotlight, no fairy tale, just truth. Real, hard, beautiful truth. Every morning, Alyssa packed Jonah's lunch with a sticky note. "You're brave. You're kind. You're enough." And every night she whispered, "I'm proud of you." Because he was learning not just how to stand tall, but how to see others, how to choose kindness when it would be easier to look away. That was her legacy. Not perfection, not applause, but quiet courage. And in the soft glow of their two-bedroom apartment with wildflowers blooming by the window, Alyssa finally understood. She hadn't lost anything at that wedding. She had found everything that truly mattered.